Hello, welcome back. Today, in our process of building out a Palo Alto Network's next generation firewall, we're going to focus on objects today, the objects tab. So, this is kind of a walkthrough of the different pieces and parts that are necessary to building security policies, which will ultimately be where we end up in our next steps. So, we've gone through several videos here of building out the different pieces and parts we need for a next generation firewall to function. So if we go up here to the objects tab, we see several object groups that we're going to look at today. So first we're going to start with addresses. So we configure policies, and in different aspects of the firewall, we can actually use the IP address of an object, or we can actually create a address object for that, which makes things a lot easier for us to see in our mind. So I'm just going to create an object here, and I'm just going to call this web server, and I'm just going to give it an IP address of my DMZ subnet. So, and then I will say OK, and I'll create another object, call this app server, and it'll also get an object, or I'm sorry, an address that is in my DMZ. And then I'll say OK. So now we have two objects, two address objects that we can use in our firewalls. So if I need to group addresses together, I can actually go to an address group, and then I could create, in this case, I'm going to call it servers. And I'm going to do this as a static group. So we can do static or dynamic groups, and we'll talk about dynamic address groups in just a minute. So I'm going to do static, then I can add, and I can add in both of the servers that I just created, both of the address objects. So now I have an address group that I can use inside of policy. So when we create addresses, general, so I originally created one that was for a type of IP net mask where I gave it a specific IP address. You can create address objects that are a range. So if you were trying to create maybe a DHCP range, or if you had a wildcard mask, or if you wanted to do a fully qualified domain name. So these are all options when you try to create addresses. So under regions, the third object group here we have. So if you have maybe offices that are located around the world and you want to create specific regions, or if you want to create different location groups, you can do that as well. So there are a lot of um, predefined regions already that are inside the Palo Alto firewall. So there's United States. And then if you wanted to add in addresses that fell under that, you could as well. So when we talk about dynamic groups, so we have a couple options. We have dynamic user groups, and we have a dynamic address group option. So really when it comes down to these two different groups, we're going to utilize the next thing that we're going to talk about, and that's called a tag. The tags serve a whole lot of different purposes inside the firewall. So by default, you'll see we have tags to define sanctioned and unsanctioned traffic. If we click on the add down here, we'll notice that every zone that we created, you can automatically create a tag for it. So like I could create an inside zone, and I could pick a color for it, and I could just make this green if I wanted to, since it is a internal zone. So I'm going to go with green, and then we'll call this inside, and then say OK. And then I could create a tag for the outside zone if I wanted to, and we could make it red. So we kind of got this allowed and unallowed type of color scheme going on here. I could actually come through here and I could create a tag called servers. And then I could give it a color of, we'll just say yellow, and then say OK. So if I went back to the address group that I just created and go in here, I can actually add the tag of servers to this if I wanted to. So when I use this in policy, it'll actually highlight the name of this group in yellow. I could also do that for addresses. So I could do that individually for these addresses if I wanted to. I could make each of these yellow as well, and you'll notice that it color changes the object. So go in here and say server and say, okay, now you'll notice that both of these turn yellow. If I go to my groups, it doesn't turn yellow, but if I add it in policy, it will. So back to tags. So here we can also, through plugins, we can bring in third-party plugin or tags. So if you had um, Azure service tags or AWS service tags that you use inside of those cloud environments. If you have Cisco TrustSec, you can bring your security group tags into um, Panorama through the plugin, and you could share those tags with your firewalls, and then those tags could then be used to create groups, or you can make your own tags. So we could just call this let's see what's a good one. It's called quarantine. And I am definitely not a speller. So call these quarantine, and we'll make it this medium violet color. Then if I go to my address groups, and I'm going to create a new address group, and this time we're going to call this a dynamic group, and we need to match based on a tag. So this is how you actually use tags to create dynamic groups. You can do this with dynamic user groups as well. So now we have a group that is called quarantine, and anytime an address object has the tag of quarantine, then it will automatically be placed inside of this group. So next we have services. So services are things like HTTP, HTTPS. So I could go in here and create a service called DNS if I wanted to. We can make it a TCP and UDP 53. So I'll just call this DNS TCP and port 53. And I could say okay, and then I could create um, DNS UDP, and it is also port 53. I make it UDP. Type that again, and say okay. And then I could create a service group, just like we created an address group. I could call this DNS, and then in here I have DNS, TCP, and DNS UDP, and say okay. And now I have a service group called DNS. So now I could use that inside of a security policy. So the last part we have is applications that we're going to talk about today for objects. So applications, we have an application database, and if you have the SaaS security inline license, you get a much larger database of applications. But you can see here in the application database, there's 5,423. And then I can use any of these applications in policy. So if I went and looked for Facebook, then we would actually see all of the different parts of Facebook. So you have Facebook, the application, and then you have all of the different pieces of Facebook that you can actually use inside of a security policy to block. So you may want to block Facebook downloading. You may want to block Facebook games. You may want to block um, Facebook chat. So there are many different parts you can block. So another good one that gets used a lot is Dropbox. So if I search for Dropbox up here, and then you'll see here's Dropbox. Well, maybe I want to be able to download things for Dropbox, but I don't want my internal users to be able to upload anything to Dropbox. So I could put Dropbox uploading as a file block or as a block on a security policy rule. So and deny that traffic. So you have a lot of opportunities to do things. So we don't want to add every single individual application that we want on our security policies. That would get pretty cumbersome and hard to read in there. So if we want to statically add applications, we can create an application group. So if I went here, we'll just call this apps static. And then here, I can actually add any application I want to. So if I put Dropbox here, and then I could say, here's Dropbox upload, and I'll add Dropbox editing, and I'll just add those in there. And I'll change this from apps to Dropbox and say, okay. So now I have a group, an application group that has several applications, and you can have different types of applications. And then I could use this in a security policy. A dynamic application group is an application filter. So the way applications filters work is we have all the different parts of the application. You'll notice this looks a lot like the applications page we were just on, but every application is in a category, a subcategory, has a risk level. It is assigned tags and tags again, and it has some characteristics. So if I went up here, search for Facebook, and then down here in the application, I might want to have a tag for Facebook, or I could create a tag, or I could use a tag for social media. But I'll just change this and call it Palo Alto Apps. And then we actually have a created group for Palo Alto Network. So if I select that group, tag, you will notice that all of the Palo Alto Networks applications are now added to this group. So if I said okay, now anything that ever gets added to the application database with the tag Palo Alto Networks will automatically be added to this application group. So this is our first walkthrough objects, and we're going to cover a few other things. There's many other parts that are necessary for security policy, but I just wanted to make this video to start out to begin walking us through that process. So hope this has been informative, and thank you very much.